My name is Grace, and at 34 years old, I thought I'd seen the worst of family betrayals. But standing in my childhood dining room last Thanksgiving, watching my father slide divorce papers across the turkey platter while declaring my mother was his biggest mistake, I realized I'd been blind to 20 years of deception. The room fell silent as cranberry sauce dripped onto legal documents. What my father didn't know was that I'd discovered his darkest secret just 3 days earlier. Before we dive into this unbelievable family drama, I want to know where you're watching from today. Are you celebrating with family or taking a break from the holiday chaos? Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with family betrayal, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Trust me, what happens next in my family's Thanksgiving disaster will make you grateful for your own relatives, no matter how difficult they might be. Let's continue with what really happened when my father thought he could destroy my mother with a stack of papers. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I was helping my mother Helen prepare the guest room when I accidentally knocked over my father Robert's briefcase. As papers scattered across the floor, my blood ran cold. There were emails printed out, intimate messages between my father and someone named Meredith. My hands trembled as I recognized the name. Meredith wasn't just anyone. She was my best friend since college, the maid of honor at my wedding, the person I'd confided in about everything. The emails dated back 5 years, detailing their affair, their secret meetings, their plans for a future together. There were hotel receipts, credit card statements for jewelry I'd never seen my mother wear, and photos that made my stomach turn. I quickly gathered everything, took pictures with my phone, and placed the papers back, my mind racing with this devastating knowledge. Thanksgiving morning arrived with its usual flurry of activity. My mother was up at dawn, her gentle humming filling the kitchen as she prepared her famous cornbread stuffing. She looked radiant in her favorite burgundy dress, the one my father had bought her for their 20th anniversary. I watched her move around the kitchen with practiced grace, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. My younger brother Nathan arrived first, 28 years old and still the baby of the family, carrying his contribution of wine and his new girlfriend Claire. Then came Uncle James, my father's brother, with his loud laugh and firm handshakes, followed by Aunt Carol, my father's sister, who always had an opinion about everything from my mother's cooking to my life choices. The dining room looked perfect, my mother's attention to detail evident in every carefully placed autumn leaf centerpiece and polished silver fork. My father emerged from his study around noon, dressed in his best suit, an unusual choice for family dinner. He kissed my mother on the cheek, a gesture that now seemed like the ultimate betrayal knowing what I knew. As we all gathered around the table, the turkey golden and gleaming, the side dishes arranged like a magazine spread, my father clinked his wine glass. "Before we eat," he announced, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used in board meetings, "I want to make a toast to new beginnings and having the courage to correct our mistakes." The words seemed innocent enough until he reached into his jacket pocket. The manila envelope he produced landed on the table with a soft thud that might as well have been a bomb exploding. "Helen," he said, his eyes cold and businesslike, "I'm filing for divorce. This marriage has been holding me back for too long. You were my mistake, and it's time I corrected it." The gravy boat in my mother's hand tilted, brown liquid pooling on the white tablecloth as her face drained of all color. Nathan's fork clattered to his plate. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But what caught my attention was the look that passed between Uncle James and Aunt Carol. They knew. They had known this was coming. My mother's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Robert, what are you talking about? It's Thanksgiving. Our children are here." But my father was already standing, adjusting his tie like he'd just closed a business deal. "The papers are all there. I've been unhappy for years, Helen. You've let yourself go, you've become boring, and frankly, I've found someone who appreciates me for who I really am. Someone who supports my ambitions instead of holding me back with mediocrity." Each word was a calculated blow, designed to hurt. Through the dining room window, I caught a glimpse of movement. A familiar silver sedan was parked down the street, just far enough to seem inconspicuous. Meredith was waiting out there, probably checking her phone for updates from my father. Nathan shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. Dad, what the hell is wrong with you? How can you do this to Mom? How can you do this to us? But our father just shrugged, picking up his wine glass like we were discussing the weather. Nathan, you're old enough to understand. Sometimes people grow apart. Your mother and I haven't been truly married for years. We've been roommates, going through the motions. I deserve happiness too. That's when Nathan stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the china cabinet rattled. Claire mumbled something about giving us privacy and followed him out. Uncle James cleared his throat, trying to play peacemaker. Robert, maybe this isn't the time or place. But there was something in his tone that lacked conviction, like he was reading from a script. Aunt Carol actually nodded along with my father's words, her lips pursed in that judgmental way I'd seen so many times before when she looked at my mother. Well, Helen, she said, you must have seen this coming. Robert's a successful man. He needs a partner who can keep up with him. My mother sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, her carefully applied makeup running in rivulets. The turkey sat untouched, getting cold, a monument to the family that was crumbling before our eyes. I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence of his affair in his face, to defend my mother who had given everything to this family. But something held me back. A voice in my head whispered that this wasn't the moment. If I was going to help my mother, I needed to be smart about it. So I sat there, memorizing every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every sign of the conspiracy that had been building under our noses. My father had orchestrated this humiliation perfectly, choosing the one day when family was supposed to matter most to deliver his devastating blow. What he didn't know was that I had my own plans forming, and his biggest mistake wasn't marrying my mother. It was underestimating both of us. After the guests had awkwardly departed with mumbled excuses and half-hearted hugs, I found my mother in the kitchen, mechanically wrapping leftovers that no one had touched. Her hands shook as she covered dish after dish, and I gently took the plastic wrap from her. Mom, we need to talk, I said softly, guiding her to sit at the breakfast nook where we'd shared so many morning conversations over coffee. She looked at me with eyes that had aged 10 years in one afternoon, and I saw something there that shocked me more than all of my father's cruelty. It wasn't surprise. It was resignation. You knew, I said, not a question but a statement. She nodded slowly, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I've known about the affairs for years, Grace. Not this specific one, but there have been others. The late nights, the business trips that didn't quite add up, the way he'd smell like perfume that wasn't mine. I stayed because I thought it was best for you and Nathan. I thought if I could just hold the family together until you were both settled, then maybe. Her voice trailed off, and I felt rage building in my chest. Not at her, but at the man who had made her feel like she had to sacrifice her dignity for her children. Mom, there's more you need to know, I said, pulling out my phone to show her the pictures I'd taken of the documents. As she scrolled through the evidence, her expression shifted from hurt to confusion to alarm. These bank statements, she whispered, I don't recognize these accounts. That's when the full scope of my father's betrayal began to unfold. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been systematically hiding assets, moving money to accounts she couldn't access. The financial betrayal was almost worse than the emotional one because it showed the cold calculation behind his actions. I spent the next hour going through our family computer, my mother giving me passwords to accounts she hadn't checked in years because she'd trusted my father to handle their finances. What we found made my blood run cold. Not only had he been siphoning money into separate accounts, but he'd been planning this divorce for at least 2 years. There were emails with lawyers, spreadsheets calculating how to minimize what he'd have to pay her, research on divorce laws that would favor him. He'd been playing the long game, setting up his exit while my mother cooked his dinners and ironed his shirts and loved him with her whole heart. There's something else, my mother said quietly, her voice steady now despite everything. I was going to announce it at dinner today, before all this happened. I've been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. It's treatable, the doctors are optimistic, but I start chemotherapy next month. The room spun around me. The timing of my father's announcement wasn't coincidental. He knew. Somehow, he knew about her diagnosis and had chosen this moment to abandon her when she needed him most. "Did you tell Dad?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "I told him last week. He said we'd get through it together." The cruelty of it took my breath away. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Carol. "Grace, I know today was difficult, but your father has been unhappy for years. Your mother must have known this was coming. He's mentioned several times that she's not the woman he married. People change, and sometimes love just dies. He deserves to be happy too." I showed the message to my mother, who laughed bitterly. She never liked me. From the day Robert brought me home, she thought I wasn't good enough for her brother. Not from the right family, not educated enough, not sophisticated enough. Robert used to defend me, but somewhere along the way, he started agreeing with her. As we sat there surrounded by evidence of betrayal, my phone rang. It was Nathan, his voice tight with anger. "Grace, you need to know something. Dad came to me last month with an offer. He said if I supported him in the divorce, if I testified that Mom was unstable or neglectful, he'd buy me that house I've been looking at. He tried to bribe me to turn against our own mother." The web of deception kept growing, each revelation more shocking than the last. This wasn't just a man leaving his wife, this was a calculated campaign to destroy her. Another text arrived, this one from Meredith. "Hey girl. Hope your Thanksgiving was better than mine. Family drama everywhere today. Want to grab coffee tomorrow and catch up?" The casual cruelty of it, the pretense that she wasn't sitting in a car outside my childhood home waiting for my father, made me want to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I screenshot it, adding to my growing collection of evidence. My mother watched me, a strange calm settling over her features. "You know what? I'm done being the victim in his story. What do we do now?" That's when I told her about Grandma Dorothy's final visit 6 months ago. Mom's mother had been a force of nature, a woman who'd built a successful business from nothing and had very specific opinions about my father. Before she died, she'd pulled me aside and said something I hadn't understood at the time. "Your mother is stronger than she knows, and she's going to need that strength soon. When the time comes, tell her to check with Peterson, our family lawyer. I've made sure she'll be taken care of, no matter what that man tries to do." Now, sitting in the wreckage of Thanksgiving dinner, her words made perfect sense. "Mom, we need to call Mr. Peterson first thing tomorrow," I said. She looked confused until I explained about Grandma's message. For the first time since my father's announcement, I saw hope flicker in her eyes. But our planning was interrupted by another call, this one from my father's private investigator, a man named Frank Morrison whom I'd found in those scattered papers. "Miss Grace? I know this is unusual, but I've been hired by your father to investigate your mother. I've been doing this job for 30 years, and what he's asking me to find, to fabricate. I can't do it. Your mother is a good woman. I think you should know what he's planning." The next hour was spent on speakerphone with Frank, who laid out my father's plan in chilling detail. He'd hired Frank to find evidence of affairs that didn't exist, mental instability that wasn't there, financial irresponsibility that was laughable considering she'd never had access to their money. When Frank couldn't find anything, my father had suggested he create some evidence. "I've seen a lot of divorces go ugly," Frank said, "but this is something else. He wants to destroy her completely, not just leave her. And between you and me, I think it's because he's in serious financial trouble and needs her out of the picture before she finds out." As the evening wore on, more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Uncle James called, his voice slurred with alcohol, warning that Robert was desperate and might do something stupid. When pressed for details, he admitted that he'd been helping Robert hide assets in exchange for a cut of the money. "But I didn't know about the cancer," he kept repeating, as if that absolved him. The family I'd grown up trusting was revealing itself to be full of accomplices and enablers, but at the center of it all was my father, the puppet master who'd been planning my mother's downfall while sleeping beside her every night. By the time we finally went to bed, it was past midnight. The Thanksgiving dishes still sat on the dining room table, cranberry sauce now congealed, turkey dried out, a feast that had become a crime scene. But my mother and I had something we hadn't had that afternoon, a plan. And more importantly, we had each other. As I helped her up the stairs, she squeezed my hand. "Thank you for standing by me," she whispered. I squeezed back. "Always, Mom. Always." Tomorrow, we would begin fighting back. Tonight, we would rest and gather our strength for the battle ahead. My father thought he'd won with his surprise attack, but he'd made a crucial error. He'd shown his hand too early, and now we knew exactly who we were fighting and what we were fighting for. The next morning arrived crisp and cold, the kind of November day that makes you grateful for warm coffee and warmer conversations. My mother and I sat in Mr. Peterson's law office, a cozy space lined with legal books and family photos that spoke of decades of service to our community. Harold Peterson had been Grandma Dorothy's lawyer for 40 years, and the kindness in his eyes as he looked at my mother made me trust him immediately. "Helen, I'd been expecting your call, though I wish it were under better circumstances," he said, pulling out a thick folder marked with my grandmother's name. Dorothy was very specific about her wishes, and very concerned about timing. What unfolded over the next hour changed everything. My grandmother, who'd built her floral business from a single shop to a chain across 3 states, had been far wealthier than any of us knew. More importantly, she'd been far more observant about my father's character than we'd given her credit for. The inheritance she'd left my mother wasn't just substantial, it was carefully structured to protect her. There were 3 commercial properties in prime locations, each generating steady rental income. There was a portfolio of blue-chip stocks worth $1.8 million. There was a collection of vintage jewelry, some pieces dating back to the 1800s, professionally appraised at over $300,000. And then there was the crown jewel, a beach house in Wilmington that none of us even knew she owned, purchased under a trust to keep it private. The total value of the estate is approximately $2.8 million, Mr. Peterson explained, watching my mother's eyes widen in shock. "Dorothy was very clear that this was to go to you alone, Helen. She actually had me structure it specifically to exclude Robert from any claim to it. She said, and I quote, 'That man has shown his true colors too many times. My daughter deserves security he'll never provide.'" The timing, Mr. Peterson explained, was crucial. The inheritance was in the final stages of probate and would be officially transferred within 2 weeks. If my father's divorce was finalized before then, he would have no legal claim to any of it. But if they were still married when the transfer occurred, things could get complicated. "There's more," Mr. Peterson continued, pulling out another document. "Dorothy also left a sealed letter, to be opened only if Robert ever filed for divorce." My mother's hands trembled as she broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in my grandmother's distinctive script, along with several photographs and documents. As my mother read aloud, I felt my grandmother's presence in the room. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, then Robert has finally shown you his true face. I've watched for years as he's diminished you, controlled you, and slowly drained your spirit. But I've also watched you survive it with grace, and I know you have the strength to thrive without him." The letter went on to detail things my grandmother had observed over the years. Robert taking money from her purse during family gatherings. Robert flirting with waitresses during anniversary dinners. Robert making cruel comments about my mother's appearance when he thought no one was listening. But the photographs were the real bombshell. My grandmother had hired her own private investigator years ago, documenting at least 3 affairs dating back 15 years. "I never showed you these because I hoped I was wrong, hoped he would change," the letter continued. "But I kept them because I knew this day might come. Use them wisely, my dear one. And remember, you are worth so much more than he ever let you believe." We spent the rest of the morning strategizing with Mr. Peterson. The key was to delay the divorce proceedings until after the inheritance was secured. My mother also needed to protect herself from any attempts by my father to claim she was hiding assets. I'll file the paperwork to ensure the inheritance is properly documented and protected, Mr. Peterson assured us. In the meantime, Helen, you need to start gathering all your financial documents. Robert has had control of your joint finances for years. We need to know exactly what you're entitled to from the marriage assets, separate from Dorothy's inheritance. On the drive home, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members choosing sides. Nathan had sent a long text detailing his conversation with our father the night before. Robert had shown up at Nathan's apartment, slightly drunk and full of justifications. He'd claimed that Mom had trapped him into marriage by getting pregnant with me, that he'd sacrificed his dreams to be a family man, that he deserved this chance at happiness with someone who understood his vision. Nathan had recorded the entire conversation, disgusted by our father's revisionist history. He actually said Mom was lucky he stayed as long as he did, Nathan's message read. Like we should be grateful he graced us with his presence for 25 years. Meanwhile, Meredith had escalated her innocent act, posting on social media about new beginnings and finally living her truth. The comments from mutual friends who didn't know the real story were supportive and encouraging, each one a knife twist to those of us who knew she was sleeping with my father. I screenshot everything, building a digital case file that grew by the hour. One of Meredith's posts particularly stood out, a photo of a sunset with the caption, "Sometimes you have to break a few hearts to find your happiness. The universe rewards those brave enough to take what they deserve." The narcissism of it was breathtaking. Back at the house, we found evidence of my father's presence. He'd been there while we were at the lawyer's office, taking things he considered his. The study had been ransacked, important papers missing, his golf trophies gone. But in his haste, he'd left behind something crucial, his laptop. He'd always been paranoid about my mother touching his electronics, keeping everything password protected. But I knew his habits, his predictable patterns. The password was easy to guess, a combination of his birthdate and the name of his first car, a Mustang he talked about constantly. What I found on that laptop made me physically ill. Not just evidence of the affair with Meredith, but a whole secret life. Dating profiles on multiple sites, active for years. Conversations with women across the state, many of whom he'd met in person. Hotel receipts that corresponded with his supposed business trips. But worse than the infidelity was the financial betrayal. He'd been slowly moving money out of their joint accounts for 2 years, claiming business losses that didn't exist. He'd taken out loans against their house without my mother's knowledge, forging her signature on the documents. He'd even sold stocks from their retirement account, leaving it nearly empty. One email thread particularly caught my attention. It was between my father and someone named Derek Walsh, discussing the product and distribution concerns. The messages were carefully worded but suspicious. Was my father involved in something illegal? I made copies of everything, knowing we'd need professional help to understand the full scope of his activities. As I worked, my mother sat in her kitchen, the kitchen where she'd cooked thousands of meals for a man who'd been betraying her for years. She wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she was making lists, planning her next moves with a clarity that surprised me. "You know what I just realized?" she said, looking up from her notepad. "For 25 years, I've been asking his permission for everything. What to wear, what to cook, whether I could visit my sister, if I could take that art class. I'd been living in a cage so long I forgot there was a door." She stood up, walked to the window where her bird feeders attracted cardinals and blue jays. "Your grandmother tried to tell me once," she said, "Helen, you're like these birds. You've forgotten you have wings." I thought she was just being poetic, but she saw what I couldn't. That afternoon, Uncle James called again, this time sober and panicked. "Grace, you need to be careful. Robert's in deep trouble. That investment firm he started last year? It's all smoke and mirrors. He owes people money, bad people. That's why he needs the divorce fast. He's trying to liquidate everything before his creditors find out about Helen's inheritance. The pieces were clicking together faster now. This wasn't just about my father wanting to be with a younger woman. This was about survival, about using my mother as a financial life raft before throwing her overboard. As evening approached, we sat in the living room, boxes of financial documents spread across the coffee table. My mother had found bank statements going back years, and the pattern was clear. Every time she'd inherited anything, received a gift, or saved money from her part-time job at the library, it had mysteriously disappeared into household expenses that couldn't quite be accounted for. My father had been stealing from her their entire marriage, small amounts that added up to hundreds of thousands over the years. And she'd trusted him, never questioning, never doubting, because that's what wives did in her generation. "I want you to know something," she said suddenly, looking at me with eyes that held new steel. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for survival. For justice. For every night I cried myself to sleep wondering what I did wrong. For every time he made me feel small and stupid and worthless. But mostly, I'm doing it for you and Nathan. So you can see that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. That love isn't supposed to diminish you. That marriage should be a partnership, not a prison." I hugged her then, feeling her strength flow through me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new betrayals to uncover, new battles to fight. But tonight, we had truth on our side, and that was more powerful than all of my father's lies combined. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the doorbell rang at my apartment just as I was reviewing the documents we'd copied from my father's laptop. Through the peephole, I saw them, my father in his expensive suit and Meredith in a dress I recognized as one she'd borrowed from me last summer and never returned. My stomach turned, but I steeled myself and opened the door. "Grace, sweetheart," my father began, his smile as false as his concern, "we need to talk about your mother. I'm worried about her state of mind." Meredith stood beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, wearing not just my dress but my mother's pearl necklace, the one that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I let them in, activating the recording app on my phone and placing it casually on the coffee table. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, playing the gracious host while rage simmered beneath my calm exterior. They settled onto my couch like they owned the place, Meredith crossing her legs and leaning into my father with practiced intimacy. "Grace," Meredith said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "I know this must be so hard for you. But sometimes people just grow apart. Your father and I, we didn't mean for this to happen. Love just finds a way." The audacity of it made me want to laugh. 5 years of emails proved this wasn't some spontaneous romance but a calculated affair. "How long have you two been together?" I asked innocently. They exchanged a look, and my father cleared his throat. "That's not important right now. What matters is your mother's well-being and making sure this divorce goes smoothly for everyone involved." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was my mother's wedding ring, the one he'd placed on her finger 25 years ago while promising to love and cherish her forever. "This belongs in the family," he said, sliding it across the coffee table. "If you help me convince your mother to be reasonable, to accept the settlement I'm offering without dragging this through court, it's yours." The settlement he mentioned was insulting, the house with its hidden mortgages, a small monthly payment that wouldn't cover her medical bills, and nothing else. No mention of the retirement accounts he'd drained, the assets he'd hidden, or the debts he'd accumulated in both their names. "Define reasonable," I said, picking up the ring and examining it. Meredith shifted uncomfortably as I noticed other pieces of my mother's jewelry adorning her, the sapphire earrings from their 20th anniversary, the tennis bracelet my father had given her after Nathan was born, even the small gold angel pin my mother wore to church every Sunday. "Your mother is sick," my father said, leaning forward with practiced concern. "The cancer diagnosis has affected her mind. She's become paranoid, delusional even. She's been making wild accusations about affairs and hidden money. It's sad, really. I've documented her erratic behavior for months now." He pulled out a folder thick with papers. Receipts for unusual purchases, testimony from friends about her mood swings, even security footage of her acting strangely at the grocery store. Any judge would see she needs help, not half of my assets. I flipped through the documents, recognizing the manipulation immediately. The unusual purchases were gifts for church charity auctions. The mood swings were her reactions to his gaslighting. The security footage showed her crying in the parking lot the day after her diagnosis, unaware she was being watched and recorded. "You've been building a case against her," I said, not bothering to hide my disgust. "For how long?" His smile turned cold. "A man has to protect himself, Grace. Your mother's not the woman I married." She let herself go, stopped caring about her appearance, became obsessed with her little hobbies instead of supporting my career. "Did you know she turned down 3 dinner invitations from important clients because of her book club?" "Book club, Grace. She chose romance novels over our future." Meredith piped up then, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Your father deserves someone who appreciates him. Someone young enough to give him the life he wants." "I'm pregnant, Grace. We're starting a family, a real family this time. One built on love, not obligation." She placed a protective hand on her flat stomach, the gesture so theatrical I almost applauded. But something in her eyes flickered, a tell I recognized from years of friendship. She was lying. I'd seen that same look when she'd sworn she hadn't kissed my prom date at the after-party senior year. "Congratulations," I said dryly. "How far along are you?" They exchanged another look, and Meredith fumbled slightly. 8 weeks. It's still early, but we're so excited. 8 weeks would put conception right around the time my mother got her cancer diagnosis. The timing was too convenient, too cruel to be coincidence. "Have you seen a doctor yet?" I pressed. "Which hospital are you using?" Her answers were vague, evasive. The pregnancy was as fake as their concern for my well-being. My father grew impatient with the small talk. "Look, Grace, I'll be blunt. Your mother can take my offer and walk away with some dignity, or I can destroy her in court. I have evidence of mental instability, financial irresponsibility, even neglect of marital duties. No judge in this state would give her more than the minimum. But if you testify on my behalf, confirm that she's been acting erratically, that she's not fit to manage her own affairs, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Your student loans disappear. That promotion you've been wanting at your firm? I golf with your boss. It's done. All you have to do is tell the truth about your mother's declining mental state." The bribe hung in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. This wasn't just betrayal. It was an attempt to turn me into a weapon against my own mother. "And if I don't?" I asked quietly. His face hardened, all pretense of fatherly concern evaporating. "Then you're choosing the wrong side, sweetheart. I'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no help with your career, nothing. You'll be as broke and pathetic as your mother. Is that really what you want? To throw away your future for a woman who couldn't even keep her husband interested?" Meredith laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. "She probably doesn't even know about all of Robert's girlfriends. Did you tell her about Lisa, honey? Or that waitress from the country club? Or the woman from your CrossFit gym? Your mother was so oblivious, it was almost sad. At least I know how to keep a man's attention." The casual cruelty of her words, the way she reveled in my mother's humiliation, finally pushed me over the edge. But I kept my face neutral, letting them think they were winning. "I need time to think about it," I said finally. My father nodded, satisfied that his threats and bribes were working. "Don't take too long. I'm filing the paperwork Monday. After that, offers are off the table." They stood to leave, Meredith making a show of straightening her dress, my dress, and adjusting my mother's jewelry. At the door, my father turned back. "Oh, and Grace? If your mother has any silly ideas about fighting this, remind her that I know all her secrets. That little indiscretion from before we were married? I have photos." They're old, but they'll still hurt her reputation at that church she loves so much. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I kept my face blank and nodded. After they left, I immediately called my mother. There was no indiscretion before marriage. She'd been a virgin on their wedding night, a fact my father had cruelly mocked over the years. This was another fabrication, another lie to add to his arsenal. But it showed how low he was willing to go, how thoroughly he planned to annihilate her if she didn't comply. The recording on my phone had captured everything: the bribes, the threats, the admission of affairs, the fake pregnancy claim. It was evidence, but it was also a declaration of war. The next morning brought fresh hell. My mother woke to find her bank cards declined at the grocery store. My father had drained their joint accounts overnight, leaving her with nothing. The electricity bill was past due, he'd cancelled her cell phone plan, and a locksmith was at the house changing the locks on my father's orders. She called me from a neighbor's phone, humiliated and scared. By the time I arrived, she was sitting on the front porch of her own home, locked out like a stranger, while movers loaded my father's belongings into a truck. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," the locksmith said apologetically. The owner of the house ordered the change. That's when we discovered the depth of my father's deception. He'd transferred the deed to the house into his name only, using the forged signatures he'd perfected over the years. My childhood home, the place my mother had decorated with love, maintained with care, and filled with 25 years of memories, was being stolen from her in broad daylight. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, some sympathetic, others already buying into whatever story my father had spread about my mother's instability. Nathan arrived as the last of my father's things were being loaded. His face was thunder as he surveyed the scene. "This is insane," he said, pulling out his phone to call the police. But the officers who arrived were apologetic and unhelpful. With my father's name on the deed and no restraining order in place, they couldn't intervene. One officer pulled me aside, speaking quietly. "I've seen this before. Your dad's been down at the station, filing reports about your mom's erratic behavior. Building a paper trail. If I were you, I'd get her a good lawyer fast." We spent the rest of the day in crisis mode. Mr. Peterson filed emergency motions to freeze assets and restore my mother's access to funds. Nathan and I pooled our savings to get her a hotel room and cover immediate expenses. But the psychological damage was evident. My mother, always so strong and composed, seemed to shrink with each new blow. "He's erasing me," she said quietly as we sat in the hotel room that night. 25 years, and he's acting like I never existed. Like our life together was just something to be deleted. That evening, Lisa Chen, my father's secretary, called my phone. "Grace, I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Your father, he's planning something big. He's been moving money offshore, setting up accounts in the Cayman Islands. There's talk at the office about an SEC investigation. He needs your mother's inheritance to cover what he's stolen from the company. If she fights the divorce, he's going to do something desperate." I heard him on the phone yesterday talking about permanent solutions. "I'm scared for your mom." The threat was vague but chilling. Was my father desperate enough to physically harm my mother? I thought about the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who'd held Nathan when he was born. Was that man still in there somewhere, or had greed and desperation transformed him into someone capable of anything? As I looked at my mother, frail from cancer treatments she'd started alone because my father couldn't be bothered to drive her, I knew we couldn't take any chances. The betrayal had deepened beyond adultery and financial abuse. Now we were dealing with a man who saw my mother not as the woman he'd once loved, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. The war he'd declared on Thanksgiving was escalating, and we needed to be ready for whatever came next. The email from Lisa Chen contained more than just warnings. She'd attached financial documents that painted a clear picture of my father's criminal activities. As I sat with forensic accountant Janet Morrison in her downtown office, the scope of his embezzlement became breathtakingly clear. Your father has been siphoning money from his investment firm for 3 years, Janet explained, her fingers flying across the calculator. We're looking at approximately $4.7 million diverted through shell companies. He's been using client funds to maintain his lifestyle, gambling debts, and multiple affairs. This is federal wire fraud, Ms. Grace. Your father isn't just a cheater, he's a criminal. The evidence was meticulously documented in the files Lisa had provided. Falsified reports to investors, forged signatures on transfer documents, and a complex web of offshore accounts designed to hide the stolen funds. My father had been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay off earlier clients while skimming millions for himself. The house of cards was about to collapse, and he knew it. That's why he needed my mother out of the picture quickly, before the authorities came knocking and froze all assets, including anything she might claim in the divorce. My mother's surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I'd taken time off work to be with her. The cancer was still in early stages, but the doctors wanted to be aggressive. As I helped her prepare, she seemed to find new strength in fighting back against my father. You know what I realized? She said, folding her hospital gown with steady hands. I spent so many years making myself smaller to make him feel bigger. But cancer doesn't care if you're quiet or loud, submissive or strong. It comes for you either way. So I might as well fight everything with all I've got. While she was in surgery, Nathan and I executed the next phase of our plan. We'd contacted 17 women who'd had affairs with our father over the years, tracked down through credit card records and the private investigators' files. Most hung up immediately, but 5 agreed to speak with us. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. He'd promised each woman a future together, convinced them to loan him money for investments, then disappeared when they'd outlived their usefulness. Combined, these women had given him over $300,000 that was never repaid. 2 had filed police reports that went nowhere. 1 had attempted suicide after he'd destroyed her marriage and left her bankrupt. Sarah Williams, a 35-year-old dental hygienist, was the most forthcoming. He told me his wife was abusive, that she was mentally ill and he was staying for the children, she said over coffee, her hands shaking as she showed us text messages from 2 years ago. I believed every word. He even showed me bruises he claimed she gave him. Now I realize he probably did that to himself. When I finally figured out he was lying and threatened to tell his wife, he destroyed my life. Called my employer with lies about drug use, had his lawyer send threatening letters. I lost everything. The meeting with Frank Morrison, the private investigator who'd switched sides, provided even more ammunition. He'd not only refused to fabricate evidence against my mother but had documented my father's attempts to frame her. He wanted me to Photoshop her into compromising situations, create fake dating profiles, even plant drugs in her car, Frank explained, sliding a recorder across the table. I taped our conversations. 23 hours of him detailing exactly how he wanted to destroy her. It's all here, admissible in court. Your father's not just a bad husband, he's dangerous. That afternoon, I met with Harold Williams, my father's boss and the CEO of the investment firm. Harold had been a family friend for 20 years, attending our holiday parties and birthday celebrations. The pain in his eyes as I showed him the evidence was genuine. I trusted him like a brother, Harold said quietly. He's destroyed everything we built. 40 years of reputation gone because of his greed. Harold immediately launched an internal audit and promised full cooperation with authorities. By the end of the day, my father's company access was revoked, his office sealed, and a forensic accounting team was combing through every transaction. The trap we set was simple but effective. Using the information from Lisa, we created a fake email from Helen's new lawyer, suggesting she was willing to accept a quick, quiet settlement for a fraction of what she deserved. The email hinted that she was unaware of the Cayman Island accounts and just wanted the divorce over with so she could focus on her health. My father took the bait immediately, responding with enthusiasm and accidentally revealing the exact location and account numbers of his hidden offshore funds in his eagerness to finalize things before she could discover them. Meredith, meanwhile, was unraveling. The promised pregnancy had failed to materialize, her social media posts becoming increasingly erratic. When I ran into her at the pharmacy, she looked haggard, her designer clothes wrinkled, my mother's jewelry nowhere to be seen. "He's not who I thought he was," she said, grabbing my arm. "Grace, I made a mistake. He promised me everything, said we'd travel the world, that I'd never have to work again. But now he's paranoid, angry all the time. He accused me of stealing from him. Me. After everything I gave up for him." Her confession came pouring out, how my father had pursued her relentlessly, how he'd convinced her my mother was cold and abusive, how he'd promised to marry her as soon as the divorce was final. I recorded every word as Meredith revealed the full extent of their plan. The fake pregnancy was his idea, designed to make my mother feel replaced and worthless. The jewelry she'd worn was stolen during one of his visits to the house. Most damning, she admitted to helping him forge my mother's signature on loan documents, thinking it was harmless because married people share everything anyway. By the time she finished talking, mascara streaming down her face, I had enough evidence to ensure she'd face charges alongside my father. My mother's surgery went well, and as she recovered, our legal team worked overtime. Mr. Peterson filed motions to freeze all of my father's assets, including the offshore accounts. The FBI opened an investigation into the wire fraud. The state bar began proceedings to revoke his law license, which he'd maintained but rarely used. Every day brought new revelations of his crimes, new victims coming forward, new evidence of the double life he'd been leading for years. His carefully constructed image of the successful businessman and family man was crumbling faster than he could do damage control. Uncle James, faced with potential charges for helping hide assets, quickly changed his tune. He arrived at my apartment with boxes of documents and a full confession. "I'm not going to jail for him," he said bluntly. "Here's everything, every account he asked me to open, every transfer I made, every lie I helped him tell. He promised me 10% of whatever he could hide from Helen. I was greedy and stupid, but I'm not going down with his ship." His cooperation was crucial, providing insider knowledge of my father's financial schemes that even our forensic accountant hadn't uncovered. Aunt Carol's reversal was more dramatic. She showed up at the hospital during my mother's recovery, tears streaming down her face. "Helen, I'm so sorry. He told me you were cheating, that you were stealing from him, that you were planning to leave him and take everything. I believed him because I wanted to. You were always so perfect, so put together. I was jealous and he knew it. He played me like a fool." Her apology came with evidence too, recordings of conversations where my father had outlined his plan to institutionalize my mother if necessary, claiming her cancer had affected her brain. As the walls closed in, my father grew desperate. He tried to access the house but found the locks had been changed on court orders. He attempted to withdraw money but found his accounts frozen. His passport was confiscated when he tried to book a flight to the Cayman Islands. Even Meredith abandoned him, filing her own police report claiming he'd coerced her into illegal activities. His transformation from competent predator to cornered animal happened in a matter of days, and there was something satisfying about watching him experience a fraction of the helplessness he'd inflicted on my mother. The investigation revealed one final, horrifying detail. Among my father's possessions, police found a life insurance policy on my mother, taken out just a month before her cancer diagnosis, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The policy was for $2 million, with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. The implications were chilling. Had his permanent solution involved more than just legal and financial destruction? We'd never know for certain, but the discovery added another layer of urgency to keeping my mother safe and putting him behind bars where he belonged. The counterattack had succeeded beyond our wildest hopes. The man who'd thought he could destroy my mother with papers served over turkey had instead destroyed himself, his empire of lies collapsing under the weight of truth and justice. The call from Mr. Peterson came while I was helping my mother pack up her hospital room for discharge. "You need to come to my office immediately," he said, his voice carrying an urgency I'd never heard before. "Both of you." Dorothy left something else, something I was instructed not to reveal unless Robert initiated divorce proceedings. Within an hour, we were back in his familiar office, my mother still weak from surgery but determined to hear whatever final secret my grandmother had kept. "Mr. Peterson's hands actually trembled as he placed an old VHS tape on his desk, along with a manila envelope marked "Evidence of Truth" in my grandmother's handwriting. "Dorothy came to me 15 years ago with this," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of keeping this secret. "She made me promise to hold it unless certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been fulfilled." He inserted the tape into an old player he'd set up, and my grandmother's face filled the screen. She looked younger but wore the same expression of fierce protectiveness I remembered from childhood. "If you're watching this," her recorded voice began, "then Robert has finally shown his true nature to the world. What I'm about to reveal will be painful, Helen, but necessary. The man you married is not just unfaithful. He's dangerous." What followed was 40 minutes of devastating testimony. My grandmother had hired a private investigator after suspicious bruises appeared on my mother's arms during a family gathering. The investigator discovered not only Robert's affairs but a pattern of calculated abuse. There was footage of him grabbing my mother roughly when he thought no one was watching, audio recordings of him threatening her in hushed tones at public events, photos documenting bruises my mother had hidden with makeup and long sleeves. "I confronted Helen once," my grandmother's voice continued, "but she denied everything, said she was clumsy, made excuses. I knew then that he'd broken her spirit so thoroughly she couldn't even admit the truth to herself." My mother sat frozen beside me, tears streaming down her face as repressed memories surfaced. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "Or maybe I made myself forget. It was easier to believe I was clumsy than to admit my husband was hurting me." The tape continued with my grandmother detailing financial abuse that went back to the beginning of the marriage. Robert had convinced my mother to put his name on her inheritance from her father, then spend it all within 2 years on failed business ventures and gambling debts. He'd isolated her from friends who asked too many questions, sabotaged job opportunities that would have given her independence, and constantly undermined her self-worth. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. My grandmother produced documents showing that Robert had been married before, a fact he'd hidden from everyone. His first wife, Maria Santos, had fled the country after their divorce, but my grandmother had tracked her down in Mexico. Maria's statement was included, detailing how Robert had drained her family's savings, destroyed her immigration status through legal manipulation, and threatened to have her deported if she didn't sign away all claims to their assets. She'd left with nothing but the clothes on her back, too terrified to fight back. "I tried to warn his new girlfriend," Maria's statement read, "but he'd already painted me as a crazy ex-wife. She believed him, just like I once did." Mr. Peterson pulled out another document, this one more recent. "Your grandmother also discovered something about Robert's family history that she felt was crucial. His father, William, had a similar pattern. 3 wives, each left destitute, each painted as mentally unstable. The apple, as they say, didn't fall far from the tree." The parallels were chilling. Like father, like son, each generation perfecting the art of psychological and financial abuse, each victim isolated and destroyed in turn. My mother was supposed to be just another casualty in this generational pattern of predation. The revelations kept coming. My grandmother had discovered that several of Robert's business partners over the years had died under suspicious circumstances, always after discovering financial irregularities. While nothing could be proven, the pattern was disturbing. There was Michael Chen, who died in a car accident days before he was to testify about Robert's embezzlement at their first company. There was David Murphy, who had a fatal heart attack at 42, just after threatening to expose Robert's affair with his wife. Coincidences, perhaps, but too many to ignore. My grandmother had compiled it all, creating a comprehensive portrait of a man who wasn't just selfish but potentially deadly. There's one more thing, Mr. Peterson said, pulling out a final document. This arrived yesterday from the FBI. They've connected your father to an international money laundering operation. The Cayman Island accounts were just the tip of the iceberg. He's been helping drug cartels clean money through his investment firm for years. They estimate he's processed over $50 million in illegal funds. Helen, Grace, you need to understand, Robert isn't just facing divorce and fraud charges. He's looking at life in federal prison. The weight of it all was staggering. My father wasn't just a bad husband or a white-collar criminal. He was a monster who'd worn the mask of a family man for decades. Everything about our life had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade hiding a criminal enterprise. Every family vacation had been funded by stolen money. Every gift had been purchased with someone else's savings. Every moment of apparent normalcy had been built on a foundation of others' misery. My mother and I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of the deception. Just then, my phone rang. It was Nathan, his voice panicked. Grace, Dad just called me. He's completely lost it. He's ranting about how we've all betrayed him, how he's going to make us pay. He mentioned something about insurance policies and said Mom would be worth more dead than alive. I think he's planning something. I called the police, but they said without a specific threat they can't do anything. The life insurance policy we'd discovered took on new, terrifying significance. Was my father desperate enough to attempt murder? Given everything we'd just learned, the answer was terrifyingly clear. We immediately went to the police with all the evidence, including the recording of Nathan's call. This time, they took the threat seriously. A protective detail was assigned to my mother, and a warrant was issued for my father's arrest not just for fraud but for conspiracy to commit murder. But Robert had vanished. His car was found abandoned at the airport, his cell phone left behind in a trash can. For 3 tense days, we lived in fear, my mother staying with me under police protection while authorities searched for my father. He was finally caught trying to cross the Mexican border with a fake ID and a car full of cash. The arrest made national news, prominent businessman revealed to be con artist, abuser, and potential killer. The mugshot showed a man I barely recognized, his handsome face twisted with rage, his eyes wild with desperation. This wasn't the father who'd taught me to ride a bike or walked me down the aisle. This was the real Robert, the predator who'd hidden behind a mask for so long he'd forgotten which face was real. Meredith, trying to save herself, provided even more evidence. She revealed that my father had talked about staging my mother's suicide, making it look like the cancer and divorce had driven her to despair. He'd researched methods, discussed timing, even written a fake suicide note on his computer. She'd thought it was just angry talk until she realized he was serious. Her testimony, combined with everything else, ensured he would never see freedom again. The man who'd thought he was the smartest person in every room had been undone by his own arrogance and the careful documentation of 2 generations of strong women. As we left the police station after giving our final statements, my mother stopped at the door and turned back to look at the building where her husband of 25 years was being held. You know what the saddest part is, she said quietly. I really did love him once. The man I married, the father of my children, he existed at some point. But maybe that was just another performance, another lie. Maybe the monster was always there, and I just refused to see it. I took her hand, feeling the weight of her wedding ring still on her finger despite everything. We see it now, I said. And he'll never hurt anyone again. She nodded, slipped the ring off, and dropped it in a trash can as we walked to the car. The final revelation was complete. The man who'd handed her divorce papers over Thanksgiving dinner was gone forever, but we were still standing. Bruised, betrayed, but not broken. Never broken. 1 year later, the November air carried the same crisp chill, but everything else about Thanksgiving had changed. We gathered at my apartment this time, the dining table I'd bought secondhand now covered with my grandmother's lace tablecloth, rescued from the house that had finally been returned to my mother after the legal battles. The turkey was smaller this year, but the gratitude was infinitely larger. My mother walked in carrying her famous cornbread stuffing, her steps steady and sure, her hair grown back in soft silver waves after the chemotherapy. She'd decided not to diet anymore, embracing every strand as a badge of survival. Cancer-free for 6 months, she announced as she set the dish down, her smile radiant with a joy I hadn't seen in years. The treatments had been grueling, but she'd faced them with the same strength she'd shown throughout the divorce proceedings. Nathan arrived next with his girlfriend Claire, who'd stuck by him through the family chaos, proving herself worthy of the ring he was planning to surprise her with at Christmas. Uncle James followed, subdued and genuinely remorseful, having completed community service as part of his plea deal for cooperating with authorities. Even Aunt Carol was there, humbled and working to repair the relationships she'd damaged with her misplaced loyalty. The legal proceedings had concluded just a month before. Robert was serving 25 to life in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial had been a media sensation, the handsome businessman's fall from grace splashed across headlines for weeks. He'd tried to maintain his innocence to the end, claiming he was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife and ungrateful children. But the evidence was overwhelming, the testimony of his victims damning. When the verdict was read, he'd finally shown his true face to the world, screaming obscenities and threats until the bailiffs dragged him away. My mother had been awarded everything in the divorce, the house, cleared of its fraudulent mortgages, the remains of their joint assets, and damages for years of financial abuse. More importantly, she'd inherited her mother's estate free and clear, the properties already generating enough income to ensure she'd never have to worry about money again. She'd sold the beach house in Wilmington, using the proceeds to establish the Dorothy Thompson Foundation for women escaping financial abuse. In just 6 months, the foundation had already helped 12 women leave dangerous situations, providing legal aid, temporary housing, and financial counseling. "I have an announcement," my mother said as we settled around the table. "I've enrolled in art school. Painting classes start in January." We erupted in cheers. She'd mentioned loving art when she was young, before marriage and motherhood had consumed her time, before Robert had convinced her that hobbies were frivolous wastes of money. Now, at 57, she was finally pursuing dreams that had been deferred for decades. "I've also joined a hiking group," she added with a shy smile. "Turns out I quite like being outdoors when no one's criticizing how I look in hiking boots." The doorbell rang just as we were about to say grace. I opened it to find William Chen, the prosecutor who'd handled the criminal case against my father. But he wasn't here in a professional capacity. Over the months of trial preparation, we'd developed a friendship that had slowly blossomed into something more. He carried a bottle of wine and wore a nervous smile, having finally accepted my invitation to meet my family in a social setting. My mother's eyes lit up when she saw him. She'd been encouraging this relationship, recognizing in William the qualities that had been so absent in my father: genuine kindness, respect, and an integrity that went bone deep. As William took his place at our table, I thought about how different this Thanksgiving was from last year's nightmare. The table was fuller despite my father's absence, or perhaps because of it. The conversation flowed freely, punctuated by genuine laughter instead of tense silences. Nathan told stories from his new job, one he'd gotten on his own merit rather than through our father's connections. Claire shared her plans for graduate school. Uncle James, working to make amends, had brought a photo album he'd found while cleaning out his garage, filled with pictures of my mother from before her marriage, young and vibrant and full of dreams. "I barely recognize her," my mother said softly, looking at a photo of herself at 22, diploma in hand, ready to take on the world. "I thought I'd lost that girl forever." "You didn't lose her," Aunt Carol said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "She was just waiting for it to be safe to come back out." It was a moment of grace between women who'd been pitted against each other by a master manipulator, now united in understanding and mutual support. The foundation had become my mother's passion project, her way of transforming personal trauma into purpose. She shared stories of the women they'd helped: Sarah, who'd escaped a husband who'd hidden all their assets; Linda, whose ex had destroyed her credit and left her homeless. Maria, who'd been convinced she was too stupid to manage money until the foundation's counselors showed her she'd been gaslit for years. Each success story was a small victory against the kind of abuse my mother had endured, proof that survival was possible and thrivers could emerge from the ashes of abuse. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," my mother said as we cleared the dinner plates. "Not for Robert, he made his choices and is facing the consequences. But for myself. For staying so long, for not seeing the signs, for letting him convince me I was worthless." She looked around the table at each of us. "I've decided to forgive that woman who stayed. She was doing the best she could with what she knew. And look where her endurance led us, to this table, this family, this freedom." William raised his glass in a toast. "To second chances and new beginnings." We all joined him, the clink of glasses a musical note of hope. Later, as we sat in the living room eating pie and sharing what we were grateful for, the contrast to last year was profound. Then, we'd been shattered, scattered, broken by betrayal. Now, we were whole in a different way, reformed and stronger like bones that heal thicker at the break point. The family we'd become by choice was more authentic than the one we'd been by obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chen, my father's former secretary who'd become a friend through this ordeal. She'd started her own business with a loan from my mother's foundation, finally free from the toxic environment my father had created. "Happy Thanksgiving to your real family," her message read. "Thank you for showing me that speaking truth is always worth it, no matter how scary." I showed it to my mother, who smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd turned their pain into purpose. As the evening wound down, we stood together in my small kitchen, washing dishes, and continuing conversations that had been impossible when we'd all been walking on eggshells around my father's moods. Nathan mentioned he was considering therapy to work through the anger he still carried. My mother offered to go with him for support. Uncle James promised to help with the foundation's financial planning, using his accounting skills for good instead of deception. Even Aunt Carol, once so critical, complimented my mother on how well she looked, how strong she seemed. "You know what I've learned?" my mother said as she dried the last plate. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the path for the best things. If Robert hadn't shown his true colors so dramatically, I might have stayed another 25 years, slowly disappearing until there was nothing left. His cruelty was actually a gift. It forced me to remember who I am, to fight for myself, to show my children that love shouldn't diminish you." She placed the plate in the cabinet and turned to face us all. "I'm grateful for this year, as strange as that sounds. Grateful for the truth, for the fight, for the victory." Before everyone left, we gathered for one last moment. My mother stood in the center, no longer the diminished woman who'd sat frozen at last year's table, but a survivor wrapped in the love of chosen family. "Robert thought he could destroy me with papers on Thanksgiving," she said, her voice strong and clear. "He didn't know that some women are forged in fire, and some families are bound by more than blood. He didn't know about the inheritance, not just the money but the strength passed down from mother to daughter. Most of all, he didn't know that when you try to bury someone alive, you better make sure they're actually dead. Because we don't just survive. We rise, we rebuild, and we thrive." As our guests departed with warm hugs and promises to gather again for Christmas, my mother and I stood at my apartment window, watching the city lights twinkle below. "Thank you," she said simply. "For believing me, for standing by me, for fighting when I couldn't." I hugged her tightly, feeling the solid strength of her, so different from the fragile bird she'd been a year ago. "Always, Mom. Always." In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, and somewhere in a federal prison, a man who'd thought himself untouchable sat alone with his schemes turned to ash. But we weren't thinking about him anymore. We were thinking about tomorrow, about art classes and hiking trails, about foundations and futures, about all the life still waiting to be lived. The universe has a way of balancing scales, of ensuring that truth eventually overcomes lies, that love conquers manipulation, that those who seek to destroy others often engineer their own downfall. My father had handed my mother divorce papers saying she was his mistake. In the end, the only mistake was his, underestimating the power of women who refuse to be broken, the strength of truth when finally spoken, and the unbreakable bonds of a family that chooses love over fear. This Thanksgiving, we had everything that mattered: health, hope, and each other. And that was more than enough. It was everything. What's your Thanksgiving story? Have you ever had to stand up to a family bully or overcome betrayal from someone you trusted? Share your experiences in the comments below, because you're not alone in these struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of survival and triumph. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that there's hope after betrayal, strength after abuse, and new beginnings after even the darkest endings. Thank you for joining our family table today, and remember, you deserve love that builds you up, not tears you down. Happy Thanksgiving, and may your holidays be filled with genuine love and chosen family who truly see your worth.